All right, we got 10:02. I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I saw a couple more guys join. So yeah, I am Trevor Froehling. I'm really excited to be on this call with you guys this morning. I am talking about something this morning that I believe heavily in. This is a policy that basically I got started with in crop insurance. I graduated from college in 2016, Eureka College, home around Oregon. And right after I got out of school, my dad was a crop insurance agent for 10 years previous. And I worked with him all through school, working on him with his production reports, his acre reports. And for me, it's this is a policy I started with. This policy was ran out in 2016, right when I got started in this business. And it's something I buy every year. It's a part of my risk management plan every single year, and I'm really excited to talk to some guys about it that maybe have never even been aware that it's existed. I know for 23, it was a big deal to a lot of my growers. We had some pretty big payments, and then for 24, we're looking at some more of those, and that's why I think it's such a big deal preliminarily today to go through the guts of this policy, why it makes sense for 25, and to get the information out there to people that don't even know it exists. But some background on me. So we're a farm in Eastern Illinois. I live in Cissna Park, which is about 30 minutes north of the University of Illinois. We have around a 2,000 acre operation. I raise corn and soybeans. And then all summer, I'm out in the hay fields doing 4x5 round bales. You can probably tell by my sunburn that I've had from this weekend doing hay. But I live in Cissna with my wife. We just recently brought home a newborn daughter. She is 2 weeks old today. And my mother-in-law and sister-in-law are out having a great time, taking her for a walk. You never really prepare for how much activity that will be when you get started, but we're getting through it with a lot of help. A lot of really great families been helping us with it. And yeah, so that's a little bit about me, but why don't we go ahead and get started? So why margin protection? So the first generation of crop insurance, way before my time, purely focused on yield. So it took your individual APH, yield protection, and you could insure against reduction in yield. They used a fixed price set every year. And if you had a yield loss, you would have a payment. And the second generation of crop insurance comes along. We're talking about revenue protection, CRC, GRIP for the county guys, and ARP is the version it is now. The difference between yield protection and GRIP, revenue protection, is, it takes price into account. And we have two price periods on our crop insurance. So the majority of you are working with revenue protection or an ECO, ARP level type of insurance. Those insurances use our spring price, which is the average for the December corn contract, November bean contract, in the month of February. Set your guarantee for the year, and you're betting against the upcoming October every year. So the average in October of that December corn and November bean contract is going to determine your harvest price, which is what your yield guarantee and harvest price are betting on. Now, part of those policies is a harvest price option, so you get the higher of the two. So this year, you're going to have your spring price. It's looking like, to me, we're sitting around $4 on December 24 corn futures today. On soybeans, I believe we're around 10.20. The spring guarantees were 4.66 on corn and then 11.55 on beans. So it's looking like this year the harvest price option is not going to play a factor as of right now, but there's a lot of years it made a big difference in problem years. Now we come to margin protection, the next phase of crop insurance. I like to refer to it as the third generation of crop insurance. So margin protection, along with using a different pricing period, is also factoring in input costs and fixed costs. So how exactly does that work? We're going to go into more detail throughout this presentation. But essentially what margin does is, instead of having a spring price guarantee, you set your guarantee for this in the prior year. So we'll be setting this price in a week from now for the 25 crop year. And then we'll also be setting fixed input costs and variable input costs that can change going into next year. So throughout the presentation, I will cover all of it. and how the different changing numbers can impact an indemnity next year. But I think, everybody on here that's not familiar with margin, you're going to be really impressed by the levels that this goes to, mitigate risk management. So starting off, what is margin protection? What's the idea behind it? So margin protection, it provides growers with an insurance product that protects against a expected operating margin. So the difference between expected revenue and specified expected costs. So we're looking at a 24-year where obviously things have been going down, down, down. Inputs have also been going down. Margin protection is a policy that protects against that. Later in the presentation, I'll also be reviewing 23, how this policy paid out, and then in 24, what we're expecting going into fall, what the payments could look like for the next year. So margin protection also takes into consideration changes in crop prices, reduction in yields, and changes in the prices of inputs used to grow the crop. And that's a part of this program that I'm excited to talk about. So the concept of margin. So margin protection has a September 30th sales closing date. So this policy has to be bought by September 30th of the prior year for the 25 crop year. So this year, 9/30 is our deadline to buy this for the 25 crop year. And the prices on this are set between August 15th and September 14th. So a week from now, we're going to start using the December 25 corn contract, the November 25 soybean contract to start setting the price for this. So the average of those contracts between the 15th and September and August 15th will determine our price. MP and RP use the same harvest prices. So RP is betting against that fall average in October. Margin protection does the same thing. The only difference is you're using a different pricing period for setting your guarantee. So in the next 5 weeks, we'll be setting that margin price. RP, we can't fix that until February, March 1 of next year for that average of the month. So the same expected county yields are used for ARP and for MP. So anybody that's bought an ECO, SCO, ARP, any of the spring county programs on a buy-up, MP is using the same exact county yield structure of those policies. The only difference is you're buying it 5 to 6 months prior to those spring contracts. So this is just a different pricing period for the same crop year, but we're all betting on the actual county yield that comes out for those same county policies next year. So MP offers coverage levels from 95 to 70% and protection factors from 0.8 to 1.2. And what that means is, a higher trigger, 95%, is what you're betting on a county yield. So if the expected county yield is 200 bushels, 95% is the highest trigger you can have on that. That'd be 190 bushels. You can go all the way down to 70% at that county level. So an SCO is 86%, ECO is 95 to 86. This can take you from 95 all the way down to 70 on a trigger level, and then take you all the way down to 0 on an indemnity. So an ECO, for example, it's a banned product, so it can only go from 95 to 86. This can take you from 95 to 0 and go all the way down. On the protection factor side, protection factor, all that means is what I'm going to get in terms of an indemnity per dollar. So 1.0 on an RP policy, for example, is you're getting the exact dollar figure you're supposed to get. So if you had a 0.8 protection factor, you're getting 80% of the payment you should have gotten. A reason I really like 80% with this margin policy, you still have a 95% trigger. If you're buying an 80% protection factor, it cuts the premium for this policy in half. So, 3 out of 5 years, this policy, hopefully isn't paying anything because we have good yields, good prices. And if that's the scenario, we're saving half of our premium in the years where there's no payment. And then if there is a major problem, we're still getting 80% of what we would have gotten, but we're saving that premium in the years where there wouldn't be a payment. You can also go up to 1.2. So that's where you get 20% more than you're supposed to get. So you can go anywhere from 0.8 to 1.2. If you want to get 20% more than you're supposed to get, if you're a real pessimist, a person can do that. But the premium from 0.8 to 1.2 is about double at that level. So margin protection is very unique. Growers can choose to also buy RP in the spring. So if a person bought drip or ARP at any point, the biggest difference is if you buy ARP, you cannot have RP with the ARP. You're getting one or the other. You're either having area insurance or individual insurance. So margin works just like ECO does, where it can pair with your RP coverage. The biggest difference between margin and ECO is if a person buys margin protection, you actually get a premium credit in the spring when you buy your RP. The higher level RP you buy, the better the premium credit. The lower the price in the spring compared to the fall also affects the premium credit. The way the government looks at it is when we get to the spring, if prices are lower than the fall, they know that it's a lot less likely you collect on an RP policy. So they're going to pitch in extra money toward the RP payment because they know, well, they bought both, but it's a lot more likely the MP that they bought in the fall is the one that triggers instead of the RP. So that's a very unique part of that policy. It's the only policy I'm aware of that's federally reinsured that actually gives you a premium credit for having both. But what I really like is you're not all in on one or the other. You have a county insurance, so you don't have to give up on your crop when, in a tough year. I got a lot of guys right now are deciding whether or not to put fungicide on. Does it make sense? Most of the guys I have that are buying margin and RP are doing that because if their neighbors are giving up on the fungicide, they're not going to save those bushels. Well, I have an RP policy and margin. I'm going to get as much as I can get for my crop, and then my county insurance is going to trigger if my neighbors give up on a crop too early. So some more concepts of margin. Prior to the sales closing date, which is September 30th, the RMA has to release the expected county yield for 25. So that's a number we're still waiting on. So for every individual county, they have not released the 2025 expected county yields. For us to calculate a premium, we have to have the price and that expected county yield number. I'm going to have a really good idea in about a week and a half exactly what this is going to cost. It may range $1 or $2 by the end of it, but once we get the expected county yields, start to have an idea what that moving price will be, then we can calculate premium and figure out what guarantees would be. So the projected price is the number set between the 15th of August, 15th of September. That's got to come out before the 30th of September when you buy it. The expected costs. So all these inputs, and we're going to go over those number two, have to have a starting point. So they're set between August and September as well. And I'm going to show a chart that shows all those different inputs that go into this policy. But all of them have a factor in calculating what an indemnity would be next year if margin was going to trigger. So the expected margin calculation, expected margin is the expected county yield times the projected price minus our expected cost. So our guarantee is yield times price minus the inputs. And then in the fall of the next year, we take actual county yield times our actual harvest price and subtract our actual expected cost from the fixed and variable inputs. So there's some moving numbers on the fixed inputs going into a year, but what I like is it's taking a lot more things into account that could, possibly affect the higher indemnity payment. So what's the after harvest result of this number? So after harvest RMA, we're going to get final county yields, we're going to get harvest price, and we're going to harvest cost. The key to the county yields is we don't get the final county yield until all the production's in for everybody that has to turn it in. So for county policies, the deadline is 2/15 to have production reports in. For all the individual guys, they don't have to turn it in until April 29th every year. So they can't calculate a payment until all those yields are in. So typically this is a policy that pays usually mid to late June of every year. And that's when you could expect that indemnity payment to come out. So understanding these expected costs. So these are the inputs on a corn crop where a person's going to look at it and say, okay, these are my fixed inputs that are set, in the next week going toward a 25 margin protection policy. So those inputs include diesel, nitrogen, phosphorus, DAP, potassium, interest, and other costs. So they have an other cost section where they're actually going out and figuring our fixed machinery cost, how much of cash rents increased, and how much of on-farm labor increased. So every year they're going out, they're taking information from universities and they're calculating these costs. When we get into April of next year, we're betting against that April average. So all of these on the board is what we're using. So I'm going to show that too. This is where all those numbers come from. So diesel's one that's set, between August and September, betting against the April average. The only one of these inputs that we won't know how it affects an indemnity for next year is interest. So interest isn't calculated until the end of October, just like on the crop insurance payments. We won't know what the interest number will be until the end of next year. I really don't know what to think of interest at this point. It's one of those things where they've been saying we're going to cut rates. We're going to, subtract that number down, walk it back down. I just got a letter in the mail a week ago on my variable operating note at Farm Credit that they increased my interest rate. So I don't know exactly what to think of interest, what they're going to do. I know that the talking points are we're going to walk this back down. There's supposed to be a rate cut some point in September. But, the last I heard there was supposed to be one in July and it never happened. So we'll just have to see what that does. DAP, urea, and potash, when I go around and I get, quotes for next year locking in these inputs, I'm not sure what to think of these either. If we have lower prices, typically inputs follow. But with the way everything's going on in the world right now, and I watch the news with everything going on in the Middle East, I don't know what these inputs could do in a major global issue. If there was a major conflict somewhere, what could the prices of these inputs go to next year? I don't know. And there have been previous years. 2019 was a great example where, we had lower input costs for a margin policy, and then they essentially doubled going into the spring of 20. So there are examples in the history of this policy where they had a major impact on indemnity payments. So I think that's something we got to really pay attention to on this policy, where there's a lot more upside to how this could affect the indemnities for next year than there is downside on inputs being, worth half as much this time in the spring, which I find hard to believe. In April, when you're going to the field, that's usually when, in my example, when they, go higher. So these are the inputs on soybeans. The only difference on this is there's less of them because we have less inputs in beans. We have diesel, interest, DAP, and potash. On a margin policy, those are the only four inputs that they're calculating. So on corn, there's more of a variance in the moving numbers. On beans, it affects an indemnity, but not maybe to an extent on corn policy would. How much does it actually affect indemnity? Depends on the increase of the inputs. Like I said, there's been years where it's been upwards of $50, $60 an acre toward an indemnity just because of the prices of the inputs increasing. So, as we get into it, we can, once I get premiums set, expected county yields, I'm going to have another meeting in about a month where it goes through what these inputs are and locked in for next year. And then I'll have a really good idea of okay, is it more likely for these numbers to be lower or higher next spring? So here's a fun opportunity. Let's take my home county, Iroquois County, right? So it's we're one of the largest counties in Illinois, growing corn and soybeans. Let's see how it looks for 2024 right now. So the projected price last fall for this policy, if you bought it in 2023, 424 was $5.09. Well, our expected county yield for 2024 is 197 change bushels. That guarantee is $956 an acre at the 95% level. Now on soybeans, I think it almost looks better. So a person that bought this in the fall of last year, you had around a $13 guarantee. Our guarantee in my home county is 61 bushels to the acre. That guarantee is $751. Now, if we take those numbers and go into what possibly harvest outlook could be for this year, current December 24 corn price as of this morning was $4.02. Not very fun. Now, when I do drive around, the one positive thing is everything looks really, really good. The only negative I can see is we had a lot of, the last 2 weeks of May corn planted. But even that corn, it looks really good. Our actual county yield last year was around 225. I used a 220 average yield for this year. I could see it being lower just because of some of that lower plant corn. If you take a 402 price today times 220 bushel corn, we have an $884 revenue number, actual revenue. The difference between the guarantee and the actual revenue number as of today is $71.60. So that would be essentially what an indemnity payment would be. That would be dollar for dollar. So if a person bought an 80% policy, it would be 80% of that number. Now, if you bought a 1.2 policy, you'd get 20% more. So it depends what kind of policy. But in my book of business, some guys say, hey, I'm all or nothing, or they look at the 95-80 strategy where I'm going to have this policy, but in the years it doesn't pay, it's not going to cost me, a lot more money. I'll cut the price in half and I'll get 80% of indemnity. For the premium for this policy, it was around $30. So if a person had a 95-80 policy on this, you would have essentially, as of today, double your money on a payment. On soybeans, it actually looks a little bit better than the corn. So our soybean November 24 price that we locked in on this was $12.95. As of this morning, the price when I checked was $10.19 for November 24 beans. Now, going out and on soybeans, it's a lot harder to figure out what the county yield's going to be. I still, everybody I meet has a different strategy they use to go figure out bean yields. I'm using 66 as my actual county yield. Our real number last year was around 68 bushel. I think it can be a little less than that. When I drive around, the beans are pretty short. But that, doesn't mean much in the scheme of things in some years I've seen. But essentially, the 1019 times 66 bushel is $672. Between the actual guarantee of this policy and the actual revenue, there's around an $80 difference. So it's actually more than on corn. This policy costs right around $17, $18 to buy for the 24 crop year. So it's essentially a 4 or 5 to 1 payment on what your investment was as of today. These numbers could change going in October, but it's good to have a running idea of where it is. Now let's look at an RP comparison, right? The 85% RP policy. So you take a guy who had a 210 bushel APH on his corn, multiply that by the spring price of $466, you have a guarantee of $978. 85% of that number is $831. Now, if we had an actual yield for the individual of 220 bushel at today's price, the revenue on that is $884. So even an 85% RP optional unit policy that costs about the same as a 95-80 margin policy, you are around $55 from getting any money back. And we all know sitting here that doesn't take premium into account as well. There's around a $30 to $35 premium on an 85% optional around me. So you're actually more like $90 away from breaking even on an 85% RP, even at $4 if you had 220 bushel corn. So that's something to keep in mind. I mean, the 10% deductible difference on a trigger really makes a big difference when we're talking, 15, 20 bushel. On beans, 65 APH, our spring price on beans was $11.55. So that'd be a $751 revenue guarantee. 85% of that number on an RP policy is $638. If a producer around me has 68 bushel beans average, times today's spring price, our fall price going in as of right now, 1019 on the running number, you'd have a revenue of $692. So you're still essentially the same as the corn. You're around $80 away from being net anything on crop insurance for 24. So obviously the margin had a big advantage. It had around a 45-cent difference on corn and around $1.50 difference on the beans, which is why you see the indemnity being different on the margin than you would on an RP policy. The key is on a margin policy, you get the additional pricing period. So you're getting the high of this fall or next fall. And I'll go into some more of that, but it's always an advantage to have more pricing periods And that's where we found, the last 3 years, margins had a major advantage because it had the different pricing period where it was a lot, more significant. So why does this policy make sense for 25? This is what matters. So as of today, December 25 corn is trading 47 cents higher than 24. So the running price today on margin protection is $4.48. What that means is if we can lock in, even if we got, let's say, a 10% bump for the next month, a person could potentially lock in around 460 to 470 on a margin policy for 25. I don't know if you guys listen to a lot of marketers. I like to listen to Matt Bennett, Kurt Kimmel through Ag Market, or some guys I listen to a lot every week. They're extremely pessimistic on a big crop and a big carry for 25. And, I think anybody that can lock in around 460 on corn, today it's around 448. You got to look at it pretty hard because I don't know how cheap corn and beans can get. The running price on soybeans right now, it has about a 43-cent premium for 25. So even on soybeans, you can lock in around 10.53 on this policy if the running average was the same as of today. Whenever there's premium built into a policy, I think it's a really good idea because, well, on the RP policy, we all know, that trigger, even if the contract is $4 on the board, it's not taking into account our basis. Around me, we have around a 30 to 35 cent basis in the fall. So I'm not getting $4 for my corn. I'm getting more like $3.65. So if you're building in 40 cents into the policy, additional premium that doesn't really exist, basically you're eliminating a basis on the insurance for 25. That's why I like it. Another major benefit of this, so expected county yields have been going up and up and up every year. We've had, a great 3-4 year stretch in terms of yields. When you add a year like 24 and subtract a 2013 or 14, it makes such a big jump in yields. I mean, there was some last year, I saw a 10 bushel jump in expected county yields because we're knocking off, 10 years ago, an average that might have been 30 bushel lower. And we're throwing on a 220 or 225 around me. It makes a big difference. So I very much expect the 197 I had for 24, for 25, that number in Iroquois County might be closer to 205. And those numbers are going to come out in about a week, but I think it's going to have a major impact on guarantees as well. So the input factor of this policy, you can see a large benefit to indemnity. If there's a global problem, we already talked about that. There's 3 pricing periods. So if you're buying your crop insurance every spring, you're fixed with 1 pricing period. That month of February, whatever that is your guarantee. It doesn't matter if it goes up or down in the summer, up or down this fall. That's your guarantee, and all you can get is the higher of February and October. And historically, if you looked at any pricing charts, October is never a high for crop insurance. So I always find an advantage if you can get an additional pricing period with your RP in the spring anyway. You're going to get 3 different months where you're getting the highest number. It's in your advantage to do that. So some more additional perks of this policy. It has a really high premium subsidy. So the government's footing the bill for some of this. It's around 44% on the highest premium level. The lower you go, a person, if they bought an 85% policy on this, the premium subsidy gets closer to 50%, where they're paying for half. So that's a perk if a person wanted to try it but not have a high trigger. In my example, I've never had one person that bought anything except a 95% trigger because it gives you the best opportunity to get your money back. And from my experience, the reason 85% RP is so hard to collect on is 85% sounds like a bigger number, but when you're taking away around 30, 40 bushel, it's a big difference, especially when, some of these hybrids, I mean, like Pioneer coming out with Z series beans and, the E's are raising 55, 60 bushel beans. I mean, there's got to be a way to get a higher trigger, and I like the 95% trigger on this. So a new farmer in a new county, you're going to have to take T-yield in a new county. If you've never farmed there before, the insurance company is not going to let you use your APH in a county you've never been before. So a T-yield in the county, if you're getting 100% of the T, it's typically 20 to 25 bushel lower than it is on a county policy. So 85% at 180, now you're at 150 on your guarantee. On a margin policy, if the county average is 200, like around me and Iroquois, you have a 30 bushel gap in coverage between the margin policy and the RP policy. And in some counties, it's bigger. It's actually 40 bushel. So that's a perk for people that are, picking up ground in a new county, a farm you've never been on before that might be, 30, 40 minutes away, where the insurance company says, hey, you're going to have to take T-yield on that. We're not going to let you use your APH. A person in that situation, this is a really good fit because it gives you a lot higher guarantee going into a year. So the premium on this, the last 3 years, it was a lot higher because our guarantees were higher. So a 450, let's say we have a 450 price, the premium on this policy is going to be 10 to 15% lower than it was last year. So the premium is getting cheaper on this. You do get your RP with this. You can pick and choose what kind of RP you'd want. So you have your county policy with the RP, you have area coverage with your individual coverage, and you get a premium credit. That premium credit isn't calculated until the spring of next year, but the better your APH is, the cheaper spring prices are, the larger the premium credit, because the government knows you are a lot more likely to collect on a margin policy than you are in an RP policy. So this is a legal disclaimer. So all coverages of this are underwritten by Hudson Insurance Company. Hudson Insurance Company, CommonGround, and CommonGround Insurance Group are all equal opportunity providers and employers. So now I'm going to open up the floor. I mean, we've went through the guts of this policy. I'm sure everybody has questions. Anybody that has questions, please put it in the chat. I'll do as much as I can to answer them. The main things I can't answer as of today are, what is the premium? Because we don't have set county yields yet, and we don't have a price set yet, right? Because it's set here starting next week. But anything other than that, I will have answers for on that. And then this is my cell phone, easiest way to get a hold of me. I live with my phone on me, essentially. My wife hates it. But I'm on the phone, all day, every day. If you leave me a message, I'll get back to you as soon as I'm able. And this is my email. You can feel free to email me. Every, county individually has different numbers. Every farmer has different numbers. So if you guys want me to go over your individual numbers, we can, compare. Trevor, how did margin do the previous 3 years? Does it make sense for me for 25? We can go through all those individual numbers. So Caitlin, I'm sure you have some questions. I'd love to answer them if you got them.
Yeah, Trevor, we have one that just came in. How does MP compare to ECO?
Yeah, so ECO is essentially the spring version of margin protection. The only difference is you're not getting a different pricing period. So ECO is going to take you from a high end on a trigger level, 95%. So that's the highest you can go on ECO, just like margin. The difference on ECO is it's a banned product. So it's only taking you down to 86% on the bottom end. Margin goes from 95 to 0. So at 95 to 86, using numbers that we've used today, essentially if you spent, let's say, around $20 to $25 on an ECO product, the most that you could get back on that policy is around 4 times your money. Margin, there's no limit. It can take you, if there was a 2012 scenario, would you rather have margin or would you rather have ECO? You would want margin because it's not capped. You can go as far as the numbers will take you on a yield loss and a high price, because we're getting the higher of this fall price, next fall price. On the yield side, we have the yield guarantee. ECO, it's capped because it's a banned product. Now, SCO is something that goes with ECO. It's also a county coverage. You can take SCO down to a lower level with it. It just gets more complicated, in my opinion, because guys, when you go to sign up for ARC PLC, margin protection doesn't care about what your ARC PLC plan is, because it's going from 95 to 0 anyway.
So I think you just answered the next question of, can I buy this in tandem with ARC County or PLC? Anything else?
Yeah, that's a good question too. So if you're signed up, if you're looking at, the federal government right now is talking about ECO and SCO extending subsidies on those products. The one knock on SCO is you can't sign up for Ark County PLC the way you want to if you're buying SCO. They're going to assign to you one or the other. You're only allowed to have one. So with a margin policy, the government's saying, well, you can do whatever you want with that. Go sign up for whatever you want. They don't care on that end. On ECO, SCO, they get a little more sticky on that.
All right, and another one, did you have any counties that had significant payments for 2023? If so, was it yield loss or did margin have a higher guarantee?
Yeah, so 2023 was a great example of why margin made sense. So we went into the fall of 22, possibly one of the best farming years that anyone's, our area has ever had. I mean, we had high prices, high yields. The fall guarantee for margin coming out of 22 going into 23 was $6.11. So that was a really good guarantee on the price. The key was that next fall on a harvest price, we only had a harvest price of $4.88. So we had $1.25 difference between 22 and 23 on the guarantee on margin because of the pricing periods. So we had some counties that had 3-figure payments per acre. Just local to me, Livingston County, we had $60 an acre payments. I'd say only 10% of the counties in Illinois didn't receive any payment at all on margin protection for 2023.
All right, and I'm not seeing any other chats pop in.
Gotcha. Well, guys, I sure do appreciate you being on the webinar this morning. Like I said, this margin protection, when somebody calls me, it's something I really love talking about. It's something I've personally purchased every year since it's came out. It helps me in my marketing every single year because when I have a guarantee, 3 pricing periods where I can, we'll lock in numbers and I know that my insurance is backing me when I go to sell grain, it helps me a lot. And it's one of those, I'm really passionate about it because I believe a lot in it. So if anybody has questions on this, wants to do an individual meeting, go through the numbers and the guts of this, a second time, once we have these expected county yields and the price guarantee, it's going to let us know exactly where we are going into next year. So just get a hold of me. I'd love to go through it with you. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this morning. And I appreciate you guys. And yeah, hopefully you guys can get on to the next one. Oh, I hear a question. You got a question?
Yeah, that's Joe.
Hey, how you doing, Joe?
Good. So I got 85% RP.
Yeah.
And would it be good to have this and the margin protection both, or one or the other, or what the price is going to be like going forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the key to it is when you lock in margin protection in the fall, you have a set standard setup. So let's say that our fall price is $4.60 on corn, and then you have a 95% guarantee on that. If we go into spring of next year and it falls apart for whatever reason, it keeps going down, and we have a $3.70 guarantee on an RP policy, is it worth it to spend money on a $3.70 guarantee 85% policy when the guarantee on margin is so much higher? What a guy can do is back off the RP knowing, well, if I have an individual major problem, I got the individual coverage to back me on the cheaper side. But you and me both know if we have the higher locked in number on the margin, it's so much more likely to pay. It doesn't make sense to put a lot of money in an RP policy.
Yeah, that's what. Like if I went on RP, if I went from 85 and backed it down to like 70 or something.
Right. Yeah. Right. And it totally, what I like about margin is it gives you options. So like if we went into spring of next year and it did the opposite, what if it really took off and all of a sudden it was $5.25? Well, then you sit down with me and say, Trevor, I want to lock in 5.25 for this year. Then you buy up on the RP. So you really have the option to do both, which is what I like. You have options. You're not stuck with one number in the spring. Yep. But if there's If there's anybody else that has questions, real quick, I'd love to take them. But other than that, it's been a great meeting. Is there any other questions in the ether? Okay. Well, hey, I thank you guys so much. Yes.
Trevor, somebody just asked how they can access the recording. This will be sent out tomorrow as soon as it finishes processing. So it will be available on demand, and we'll have it posted on YouTube as well.
Excellent. Well, hey, thank you again, guys. Like I said, this is something I really love talking about. Hopefully you guys can jump on for the one I'm gonna have later in September. We'll have all the final numbers and we can go over them again. But thank you. And I hope all you guys have a great rest of your week.